Hello, viewers, and a very warm welcome to another episode of Crime Talk in English. And today, I have a story that has many stories within it, plots with subplots, and a terror trail spanning across continents and several countries. Of course, it has a big bearing on India as well, because as far as the Indian context is concerned, it started in 1994, and the protagonist of this story is Ahmad Omar Sheikh, that who was known as just Omar Sheikh later uh, in uh, in the parlance of investigators and terror agencies. Now, why we are discussing and talking about this story today is because it has a very important context in today's time. Omar Sheikh will soon be released from a Pakistani jail, and he had been in jail on allegations of killing a US journalist back in 2002 that goes by the name of Daniel Pearl. But of course, as far as the murder charges were concerned, they did not stand in court against him, and his death sentence in a trial court was commuted by the High Court to 7 years, and now the Sindh High Court has actually ordered for his release. Whether it will happen or not, or what legal intricacies are concerned, we are hearing that there could be a challenge to the release order as well. But the story doesn't start from here. It actually starts from 1994, when Umar Sheikh was arrested in India. And after spending 5 years in an Indian jail, Umar Sheikh managed to get back to Pakistan. Now, how did that happen? That's why I said that there are plots and subplots in this story. Several other terror stories are linked to it, and we are going to be talking about that. I'm going to join the dots for you to explain. I'll try to explain to you how there was a link in several other cases. And so it goes back to 1994, when Umar Sheikh, as part of a terror ring from Pakistan, had planned kidnappings of international tourists in India. Now, this is directly linked to what was happening in Kashmir, and that's why it was believed that perhaps it was some kind of a covert operation by Pakistani agencies, ISI, military operations on kidnappings of tourists that had already taken place before in Kashmir. But it was perhaps for the first time that outside of the state of Jammu and Kashmir, international tourists were targeted. And this is when, Umar Sheikh, along with his accomplices, managed to kidnap four foreign tourists. Three were British and one was an American citizen. Once they were kidnapped, the agencies, perhaps unsure of from where to start the investigation, unsure whether it was a terror plot or some other kind of a conspiracy. But it so happened that it was just by chance, pure luck, that Indian agencies got to Umar Sheikh. And how it happened was that the police in Delhi and in UP, in Ghaziabad, was investigating a big robbery case, and the trail led them to a house in Ghaziabad on the outskirts of Delhi. When the police raided that particular premises, they found one American citizen over there, and he explained to the police what had happened. And then it was pretty clear that this American citizen is linked to the recent kidnappings that had taken place then, and those kidnappings had taken place to get terrorists from Jammu and Kashmir released. And later, the three British citizens were also found, they were rescued. And finally, the man who is today in the center of all this discussion, Omar Sheikh, was in prison. And in fact, he was even convicted later and spent time in Delhi's Tihar jail. But his stay in prison in India was short lived. And it was in 1999 that Umar Sheikh managed to get out of jail and get back to Pakistan. Now, how did this happen? You all have heard of the IC 814 Indian Airlines plane hijacking that took place in 1999. And Omar Sheikh was one of those four terrorists who were released when the swap took place. When the terrorists had hijacked that plane and they had taken it to Kandahar in Afghanistan after it took off from Kathmandu, landed in Amritsar once for refueling, and finally reached Kandahar, and then the negotiations started. And four Pakistani terrorists who were in Indian custody had to be handed over to Pakistani terrorists because they had demanded the release of these four men. And Omar Sheikh and Maulana Masood Azhar, the Jaish-e-Mohammed chief that everybody knows of, were among those four who were swapped for passengers in that ill-fated flight. Now, it doesn't end here, because the story that started from India, as far as Omar Sheikh is concerned, was not going to end in Pakistan. And a bigger international terror trail started a few years later, because once back in Pakistan, Omar Sheikh was obviously back to his normal functioning. And that's when the Daniel Pearl case happened in 2002. Now, what was the Daniel Pearl case for which Omar Sheikh has been in jail for many, many years? Daniel Pearl was an American journalist. He was the bureau chief of the Wall Street Journal, working in Pakistan. And he began to investigate as a journalist the links between the rise of Islamic terror in Pakistan, also the linkages with Afghanistan, and a very infamous terror case that had taken place in 2001 when there was a flight from Paris to Miami, which was almost blown off. And that case is known as the shoe bombers case, because the suspected terrorist in that flight, that goes by the name of Richard Reed, also known as shoe bomber now, because he had placed explosives in his shoe, but he was overpowered and by the crew, and he was not successful in detonating the explosives that were concealed and they were hiding in his shoe. So Daniel Pearl was trying to investigate the linkages between Islamic terrorism in Pakistan and this particular case where a British national, Richard Reed, was in the center of this terror trail. Now, there are a lot of similarities between Richard Reed and Omar Sheikh, and that's where these common linkages perhaps come, and that's what Daniel Pearl, the journalist, was trying to unravel. We'll come to those later, but just getting back to Omar Sheikh's background and who really was Omar Sheikh. That in itself is a fascinating and intriguing story, because he wasn't the usual jihadist that one would come across, especially in those days in the 1990s when there was no ISIS and there was no talk of people getting attracted to the violent ideology and things like that. it wasn't known, that somebody who came from a fairly elite background went to the London School of Economics, pursuing higher studies in applied mathematics, economics. But he did not go on to graduate from there because, obviously his mind was somewhere else, and, he was thinking about other things. But he was somebody who made it to the London School of Economics. And before that, he was born in 1973 in England. His origin obviously was Pakistan. He was born in 1973, and his origin was Pakistan. And he went to a fairly elite school in England till he was in his teens. Got relocated to Pakistan, and in his teens, probably between when he was 14 to 16, he studied in an extremely elite boarding school in Pakistan, which has a list of alumni, including cricket star and now Prime Minister Imran Khan in their list of prestigious alumni, and many others who've done well in Pakistan. So this is the pedigree of Omar Sheikh. Comes from a good family, went to elite schools, went back to England once again, finished his high school from England, and then he took admission in the London School of Economics. So that's the background, all perfect as far as anybody's antecedents are concerned. But obviously there was a lot that he learned when he was in Pakistan, came in touch with people that attracted him to the violence that he finally got into, and that violent ideology, because there are many who say that once he got back to England, he became sort of an Islamist jihadist, and he started to talk about those things. Another very fascinating characteristic about his personality is that there was one striking similarity between Umar Sheikh's kidnapping of tourists in India and his kidnapping of Daniel Pearl in Pakistan. In both the cases, he actually came across as a very friendly man to his potential victims. In India, he had concealed his identity. He used the name Rohit Sharma, and he convinced the tourists, the international tourists, that his uncle is dead, and he's left him a huge property, and he will be taking them to those places, and that's why one group of three was taken to Saharanpur, and another American citizen was brought to Ghaziabad. So this is just to bring about the similarity in the two kidnappings. In Daniel Pearl's kidnapping, he got in touch with Daniel Pearl, lured him, convinced him that he will get him in touch with people who will be able to help him with his story that he was working on, and his investigative journalism story that Daniel Pearl was working on. And that was actually a trap. It was his friendly ways where in both cases, people fell into the trap only to be realized that they are victims of a larger syndicate, a terror syndicate, much later. After Daniel Pearl was kidnapped, there was also a video of his beheading that was seen to the world. Of course, very gory video, and Daniel Pearl's killing left the whole world shocked, because for a terrorist to be killed like this, obviously, for a journalist to be killed like this by terrorists was obviously something that was going to shake the sensibilities of the civil world, uh, no matter where people were. Uh, you know, the connection that Daniel Pearl's killing, the terror linkages, and perhaps covert operations, one can say, of either Pakistani intelligence or their military or the security establishment. Somewhere, all of that was has been suspected over the years, and in fact, there have been also links talked about with 9/11, because there are reports that have said, not established though in a court of law, that Omar Sheikh was in touch with the 9/11 bombers. He had sent some money to one of them. And when it comes to these covert operations, uh, it's interesting that General Parvez Musharraf, in his book In Line of Fire, has described Umar Sheikh as a British intelligence agent. He says that he was picked up by MI6 for carrying out covert activities, but he later turned rogue. So these kind of allegations and counter allegations about covert operations, a state's complicity, only indicate that perhaps there was more than what met the eye. He wasn't just uh, another terrorist who had got lured to jihadi ideology. There was perhaps more to it, and a lot has been written about it, a lot has been spoken about it. But in today's date, extremely, extremely important that despite all of this, Umar Sheikh might be coming out of jail, and that's what makes these allegations and this suspicion and speculation about state's complicity in Pakistan. It gives it a little more validity, perhaps, because arrested in India in 1994, gets out from prison here, spends all his life in Pakistani jail, very serious terror charges. His release from an Indian jail is planned by a terror group that hijacks a commercial aircraft, goes to Kandahar, the hub of Taliban then, and despite staying in Pakistani jail, he might walk off a free man tomorrow. The legal procedures might take a different turn, but this is uh, the story of Omar Sheikh, linked to so many other people that I have narrated today. And in the middle of the story, I also spoke about a shoe bomber. That shoe bomber somewhere is linked to the story, and that's exactly what Daniel Pearl was investigating. Richard Reed, a very similar character to Omar Sheikh, born a Christian, then decides to convert to Islam, and then carries out this attempted blowing up of a flight from Paris to Miami. Who was this shoe bomber? We will be discussing this story in part 2 of this story that I've just narrated, because the two stories are interlinked, and perhaps it might get very long if I tell you this story uh, in this episode. So, in my next episode of Crime Tuck in English, I'll be talking about the shoe bomber and his possible links with Islamic terror groups in Pakistan, and that was the reason why Daniel Pearl wanted to unravel the truth. So, keep watching Crime Tuck English and wait for part 2 of this story, where we'll bring to you more facts about the Omar Sheikh case and also who this shoe bomber was. Thank you for watching Crime Tuck. We'll be back again with another story.